Hi, everyone. I love the ideas you came up with in the last phase of ideation. Emily, what's the next step?
Hey everybody! Yes, great job in the ideation phase. Now there are two phases left, prototype and then test. They're really closely connected because you'll want to design your prototype with the user testing in mind. So in prototyping, you'll actually build a lo-fi, kind of like a draft version of one of your ideas. Then in the test phase, you'll have your user interact with your prototype and see how they react to it. So you'll start by picking your best idea or multiple ideas that you came up with in the ideation phase, and then we'll need to come up with a prototyping plan.
Ooh, that sounds fun. But what if the best idea that I had seems totally impossible to implement at home? Like, for example, Max had an idea to make a robot that moves around while it shows the person who's FaceTiming you as that person would move. How could he build a robot?
That's a really good question. So for our purposes, a prototype is basically anything you can make that will help bring your idea to life for your user when you're doing testing. So it doesn't have to look exactly like what your final design would be. Like, it doesn't even have to be fully functional. Think of this as an opportunity to see how your user interacts with an important aspect of your idea, not necessarily the fully functional, fully created idea. And this is also an opportunity to surface any initial deal breakers for the user that you might not have thought of. So to go to your question about the robot idea, you're right. We cannot expect Max to build a robot. That would be amazing, but it would be a lot of work. Based on the sketch, I think it looks like the robot is kind of holding up a phone for FaceTiming. And I imagine that, yeah, it's moving around, acting like the person on the screen. So what I would suggest, like one way to prototype this is that Max could actually pretend to be the robot himself. He could hold up the phone or attach the phone to himself and actually act like how he imagines this robot would act.
Oh, I get it. So there's some type of imagination and acting involved in prototyping.
Yeah, there definitely can be. In this case, the student and the tester will both need to be playing along. So when Max is designing his prototype, he should really just be thinking about the best way to convey the experience. So like if he's pretending to be the robot, he might want to wear some clothing that's not too distracting, or maybe there's some clothing that has colors on it that he thinks would be in the final robot. And he should think about like how he would talk if he talks, how he would move, and yeah, like I'll leave that up to him as the designer. He'll just need to imagine how the robot will behave and then convey that during the testing phase.
Well, we have a range of ideas from the class. Some people came up with products, services, apps, all sorts of very creative things. How can we prototype all of them?
I'll address the question about services first because what we just described with Max is something that students who design services can use too. They can try to just like act out different situations or scenarios and yeah, use that creativity and theatricality. When it comes to physical products, the face mask, for example, what I like to do when I'm prototyping is try not to make everything from scratch. Just use what's around to make something, and that actually can make it more realistic too. So I actually already have a face mask here. And I found these like hair elastics and headbands and stuff in my house. I've got some like sewing stuff, pins and needles and thread. So I can, combine these items and make something similar to what I was imagining for the cyclist's face mask. If I didn't have sewing stuff, I could also try using a stapler or tape or hot glue, whatever's around. If I didn't have the mask itself, I could use a scrap piece of fabric, paper towel. Just remember, like the prototype doesn't have to necessarily be an actual functioning mask. It can just help you test whatever your design is. So like if your idea were all about making the elastic more comfortable on people's ears, you'll really want to focus on whatever's interfacing with the user's ear. It doesn't matter as much what the material of the mask is or how durable it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what if the idea is more complicated, like Natalie came up with a full bodysuit?
Okay, that's a cool idea. And yeah, it would probably be difficult for her to create an entire suit. But she might be able to create prototypes that mimic some part of the suit or like an aspect of the suit. So she could think about what questions she wants to answer about her design and then prototype elements of it accordingly. So for example, like if she, really has this idea of like an all-encompassing maybe suit that's made out of plastic or something, one question she might have is it going to be too hot for people to use? I mean, I know it's like heating up over there in New York. Is somebody really going to want to wear a full body suit when they're outside and it's really warm? So if that's one of her questions, she could have her user put on something similar to her suit design, like a raincoat and rain pants next time they go outside. Just like have them walk around during testing, and you can talk to them or observe whether or not they're getting overheated. That's a way of just like testing that little piece of her idea without having to build a suit from scratch. Maybe she has questions about whether or not the suit is too bulky. She can just have somebody wear their own clothes, but she can attach pieces to it that mimic pieces of the suit, like using cardboard or other clothing, and like see how they move around. So you can apply this way of thinking to other really big ideas, like some of your students who are designing bedrooms or spaces. They could also just find one element to test instead of having to overhaul an entire bedroom. So like they could have rearranged furniture, but they could also just take one piece, like they could focus on just the wall decor element of their design and prototype that.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not about building a prototype that's exactly like your design, just creating something that will help you answer questions about your design. Back to the digital question. Do you have any advice for students who came up with ideas for apps or other digital services?
Yeah, so we're lucky. There are a lot of tools that you can use to prototype digital products. One that I would recommend that's really easy to use is Google Slides. So if your students came up with an app idea, they can use Google Slides to just make a few mock-ups of like different screens of how that app would work. So they'll basically treat each slide as if it were a different screen in the app, and they can create a sequence that way. And there's a resource posted in Google Classroom that will help them do that.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So it's up to you all as designers to come up with the best way to prototype your idea. It's going to be different for everyone. To break it down and summarize, the first step in prototyping is determining which aspect of your idea you want to see your users' reactions to. The second step is figuring out what kind of prototype to make in order to be able to observe those reactions. And the third step is making the actual prototype. Next week, we are on to testing, but not quite yet.